Hey guys, so today we are talking about the French and Indian War, or what should be called the 7 Years' War. But you might have learned about it as the French and Indian War. It is going to be taking place all over the world, but we are going to be more concerned about what's happening here in the colonies in North America. Okay, so three significant events are going to happen between 1750 and 1763. The British are going to have a war against the French in America, in the colonies here. Then there's going to be a surge in trade, which will increase the American debt to the British. Then there's going to be an increase in westward migration that will lead to violence and eventually rebellion. This is going to be the moment where there's just the point of no return, right? That we are going to have a moment that's the tipping point. You're going to be deciding kind of what you feel like that tipping point is, but where is that moment is going to happen that you're like, yeah, there's no going back, that nothing can be the same. We are past reconciliation. We can't make things how they used to be. Okay, so we start off with the Albany Congress. This is going to be important because this is kind of where you see the colonies coming together and trying to unite towards a common goal and towards a common idea and moving forward. So the Iroquois Confederacy is going to be irritated and angry because they felt that New York, which they had, New York settlers were pushing into their lands. So in order to mend relations with the Iroquois, you're going to see that they are going to send a Mohawk leader to try to make that better and try to unite them, and it doesn't really work out so well. But Benjamin Franklin is going to call for unity among the colonies in order to counter French expansion. That it feels like the French are expanding and that the colonies need to stand together. That is where this cartoon is from. So this is not actually from the American Revolution, little known fact. Well, I mean, it can be a largely known fact. However, like, everyone just assumes, you're like, unite or die, obviously American Revolution. No, this is about the French expanding in the colonies. So the Albany Plan is going to propose a general government between the colonies and a continental assembly to manage trade. They also want to have a coherent Indian policy and a colonial defense system. This is going to compromise the colonial assemblies as well as the authority of Parliament. The Albany Congress will be created in 1754. It's going to be meeting representatives sent by the legislators of the 7 of the 9 northern British North American colonies. Representatives will meet daily in Albany, New York, and they're going to discuss better relations with natives, common defense measures, all that wonderful stuff. And they're going to have this idea of trying to unite the colonies, not necessarily in creating a new country yet, we're not there yet, but they are going to kind of put this idea in the head of the colonies of coming together and working together and having a coherent structure between one another. And they'll pursue a treaty with the Mohawk tribe and other Iroquois tribes. They're going to debate about managing debt, things like that. And ultimately, the colonial governments are going to fear losing their power and territory and commerce. And so the Albany Plan will fail, but you're going to see this moment where we're coming together and realizing the fact that we in fact stand stronger together than apart, and that we can collaborate to come up with a solution to the problem at hand. So you're seeing this kind of like moment where you're like, good for later. We're going to realize this all even more later. Okay, the Great War for Empire. If you ever take AP Euro, and Mr. Smith, I'm sure will appreciate this, Europe just loves fighting each other, like just all the time. This is what they're into. I mean, honestly, the 100 Years' War, they just kept fighting each other. They would stop for a little bit because of the Black Plague, and then pick it back up. Okay, so they're just really into fighting each other. So 1756, Britain and Prussia is like pre-Germany / Austria, will be fighting against France, Spain, or wait, well, Prussia's like kind of Austria, kind of not. It's a weird territory. I think it was Germany, more or less, against France, Spain, and Austria, and they're going to be fighting in Europe. They're going to be fighting in other colonial territories, and one of those colonial territories includes us. And so this will be what sometimes is called the French and Indian War, but you should be calling this 7 Years' War. And so pretty much it is going to be a clash of territory here in the colonies will be our part of it that we're concerned with. It's much bigger over in Europe, but we're not concerned with that And so there's a clash over territory between the French and the English settlers, and you're going to see the French are going to ally with the Native Americans because they're like, get off this land all together. And then the English settlers are like, no, it's ours. And so you're going to see that the British Army will send over troops in order to help the colonists to regain their land, and just going to demolish the French, as always, in America and, well, North America, and it will be fantastic. You're going to see that the posts in the Western valleys will be reclaimed, but not for long, because the English are going to issue the Proclamation of 1763. The Proclamation of 1763 creates this line down the Appalachian Mountains, and yes, I'm saying the Appalachian Mountains because that's how people of Appalachia call it, so that's what I'm going to say. It draws a line down the mountains, right? And it says, hey, you cross this line, not cool. It's like off limits. You can't go past there. And the colonists hadn't been told precisely where they could and couldn't go. And so they are not going to take too kindly to this. They're going to be like, well, Mama England, we're going to do exactly what we want. And so that's what they're going to continue doing, is doing what they want, which then is going to lead to some issues. So Britain's national debt is going to soar from 75 million pounds, I almost said dollars, that's not right, 75 million pounds in 1756 to 133 pounds in 1763. They're fighting a lot of wars that cost a lot of money. The British are going to raise taxes on the poor and middle class because the government at this point is run by people of wealth, and the people of wealth are like, I'd rather not be taxed. And so they're not going to have taxes because they're the ones calling the shots, and so they're going to have everyone else pay the taxes. They're also going to increase the size of the British bureaucracy to collect the taxes, which is going to cost more money because there's more people you got to pay. And those with little political power, e.g. the colonists, are going to appear most vulnerable and most susceptible to increased taxation. And you're going to see that this is going to cause a lot of outrage, both in England and here in the colonies, because people feel like that's not fair, right? That they aren't having accurate representation in Parliament, that they are not having the same treatment, they don't have the same rights as a British citizen, and so they don't feel like they should have the ability to be taxed in the same methodology. This will bring us to the Sugar Act and officially the end of salutary neglect. So the Sugar Act is going to be placed in 1764. It was at a 3 pence per gallon duty on French molasses in the colonies. So this was trying to force the colonies to not buy French molasses and instead buy English products, right? Mercantilism at its finest here, folks. Like a tariff, more or less. And Americans are going to publicly argue that the new tax is going to destroy the French trade. That they're like, hey, like, we want to trade with France, and if we aren't going to be buying their molasses, they're not going to take too kindly to that. And is also going to destroy the American distilling industry because molasses is important in making certain types of alcohol at this point, which is a high dollar industry for making alcohol out of natural products in a long-lasting way. Americans are going to seek ways to evade this tax. They'll smuggle, they'll bribe, nothing new. America just doing what America wants. Yes. But this is going to be the official end of salutary neglect, right? That salutary neglect was where the mother country of Great Britain didn't really care what the colonies were doing. They didn't really wonder or were concerned with what was going on. And now that moment's going to change, that they are concerned with it. They want to tax us. They want to control what's happening. Debate's going to begin over whether the Sugar Act is unlawful, as the tax did not originate with the people. Important idea, right? That the colonists feel like that taxes have to originate from the people. They have to be okay with it. And they're going to accuse the breaking they're going to accuse Parliament of breaking the law, and that they feel like this is going to try to make the colonies slaves to the British, and that they feel like they're being treated less than Englishmen, even though technically they are Englishmen under the law, but they feel like they're being treated lesser than because they're colonists. And points of the act are going to be debated, but the reality was the act revealed new efforts by the British to take more control over the colonies. Some English parliamentarians, that's a big word, argue that the colonists did not have the same rights as Englishmen because they were living outside of Britain and were second-class subjects of the king. So, things are heating up, folks. So then we have the Stamp Act of 1765. Okay, just a clarifying point. When I was your age, I 100% thought the Stamp Act, and you might think I'm stupid for this, and that's fine. The Stamp Act was talking about like stamps on letters, but you actually needed government stamps. Think of it as like a, you know, like a literal stamp of approval, like, oh, yep, you can do that. Like, this is the printed material. So you need it on court documents, land titles, contracts, newspapers, other printed materials. So like literally anything that was going out in the stratosphere that was either a legal document or something to be bought and sold, you need to have a stamp of approval to make it happen. So that's what the stamps are talking about. Anyways, Greenville, guy in Parliament, is going to hold that the colonies should pay for their own defense. That, you know, hey, we came and defended you in the 7 Years' War. We spent money and time and all of that, and that you should pay for that. And, or, you know, you should pay for that or face a Stamp Act. Like, that's just what it is, folks. We're going to make you pay one way or another. The British are going to contend that the colonies had virtual representation because of Parliament members who were transatlantic merchants and sugar planters in the West Indies. They're like, they basically have your interests at heart, so like whatever. And so the House of Commons is going to ignore the colonial protests of the Stamp Act, and they're going to pass an overwhelming majority. And as they're also passing the Stamp Act, they're also going to pass the Quartering Act, which is going to require colonial governments to provide barracks and I said that backwards, food for British troops. And this is going to be exerting more control over the colonies and trying to get them to act a certain way. That then brings us to the Townshend Acts, another way of trying to get the colonies to pay for the war. Like, that's the common theme here, that like every tax they're putting in place, they're trying to get us to pay for the war. And we're like, no, like, here's the bill back. We don't want it. So this is going to be led by a guy named Charles Townshend, a British financial manager, and it's going to be taxes on lead, glass, paint, paper, and tea. And it's going to be collected by British custom agents, and the colonists are going to respond by colonial boycotts, that they're just going to refuse to buy these items, and that they are just going to not be in favor of it. All right, they're going to go other methods to try to get around the things that they need. In response, the British government removed all the taxes except the tax on tea. This will then lead us into the Stamp Act Congress. So in Virginia, Patrick Henry very infamously, you know, give me liberty or give me death, is going to condemn Greenville, George III, aka the King of England, and 9 assemblies are going to send delegates to the Stamp Act Congress, which is going to meet in New York City in October 1765. We still have 11 years, right? Yeah, 11 years until we get to the Declaration of Independence. So we still got a ways to go. Things are not looking good now, and we still have a long time to go. The Stamp Act Congress is going to meet, and they're going to protest the loss of rights and liberties. They're going to declare that only representatives elected by the colonists could tax the people, so not Parliament. And they're going to petition for the repeal of the Stamp Act, and some members are going to form that boycott I talked about. The Stamp Act goes into effect November 1st, 1765. Mobs are going to demand that stamp collectors resign in Boston. The Sons of Liberty are going to burn a tax collector in effigy, so not like a literal, they're not going to burn a literal tax collector, but they like make it like a scarecrow looking tax collector right in effigy. They're going to burn it and be like, this could be you. So it's intimidating. And later they will destroy the home of Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson. So things are getting real wild in Boston for a very long time. They're going to be encouraged by wealthy merchants and patriot lawyers like John Hancock and John Adams. Mobs of middle-class merchants and minor merchants are going to protest British policies by destroying property and intimidating royal officials. These actions are going to spread to other port cities in nearly every single colony, but they're like light in the southern colonies because the southern colonies, plantations, and they need that strong connection to the mama country of Great Britain. That they're not as like independent as Boston with their economy, that they need someone to buy their goods and wares of tobacco and cotton and rice, that they don't have all these like artisans and merchants and things like that like they do in the northern parts of the colonies. Just a sidebar. The colonists were also known for tarring and feathering the tax collectors. And just to put this in perspective, tar is really, really, really hot. Okay, so it's not like, just roll around in some like glue-like material and then, haha, there's feathers all over you. Like, it would burn you, possibly kill you. They would then feather you, and then insult to injury, they would pour tea down your face hole, right? So not fantastic behavior. Okay, that leads us then to the Boston Massacre. I want to point out right now, this is really important to note as we talk about modern news media and all these things, the usage of words, okay? So when you say a word like massacre, that makes you think a bunch of innocent people are being just mowed down, right? Okay, so think about that when we use words like riot, massacre. I can't think of another word right now that would kind of have that same like feeling, that people are mindful both in the news media as well as in history about the words we use in order to kind of provide a certain feeling and view towards an event. So remember that when we talk about the Boston Massacre. Okay, so there's going to be conflicts between the colonists and British troops that are stationed in American port cities. This is going to escalate in March of 1776 to where we get to Boston. Essentially, there is going to be a crowd together, and they're going to be like, down with Britain, down with the king, blah, we hate taxes. And there's like, a group of soldiers trying to maintain order, all that good stuff. Let it be known that the colonists were taking like rocks and like putting them in snowballs and stuff and throwing them at the troops, and like things were getting really hectic, and a guy thought he heard someone say fire, and so he was like, yep, and he fired his gun off, and then everyone followed suit. By the time the gunpowder smoke cleared, there had been 5 American colonists killed. This is going to lead to a question and debate over sovereignty. Sovereignty meaning your kind of independent ability to call your own shots, right? Well, bad choice of words there. Your own path, what you're going to do, right? Especially as a nation, that you have independence as a nation. Sidebar, I've always just low-key left this dog hanging out at the bottom of this lithograph. Anyways, so many colonists are going to remain loyal to the empire. I feel like it's a really common misconception that colonists were like, yeah, separate from Great Britain, but that wasn't a common theme, truly. It was probably more of a minority that were patriots and wanted separation from Great Britain. A lot of people were ambivalent. They really just were like, whatever, like, I'm just living my farm life, doing my deal, whatever happens, happens. And then you're going to have a contingency that's also still loyal to the empire because they're like, things are still fine. Like, why would we mess this up? So this kind of increasing conflict that's going to happen is going to have many American leaders believe that the British want to, by 1770, that the British want to exploit the colonies for their gain. They're not wrong, right? That the British are in it for the money, that they don't care about anything else, that they just want to control us and make whatever happen, that they don't have our best interests at heart. So Benjamin Franklin is going to suggest the colonies are now distinct and separate states with the same head or sovereign, the king. So he's like, we're still part of Great Britain, but perhaps we are not Great Britain anymore. We're our own existence. We're our own sovereign existence, but we're still beholden to the king. Oh, that's just showing you the different acts over time. And that's just showing you imports and exports to Britain, kind of the effects that those boycotts have and colonies. Yeah, okay. So this then leads us to the Tea Act and the Coercive Act. So the Tea Act is 1773. So the Townshend Act is repealed, right? Except for the part about tea, which then leads us to the Tea Act. So this is an act that's going to try to provide relief for the East India Company, the tea company. They had a lot of debt, and this is going to try to make things better for them. It gave the company a government loan, and it cancels the English import duty on tea. So it's like, buy this tea to the colonies. And this is going to further debate as well as resistance on the tea issue. It's going to cause turmoil. In response to the Tea Act on December 16, 1773, artisans and laborers are going to dress up as Native Americans, and they're going to hop onto a ship in the Boston Harbor. They're going to take a bunch of this tea from this tea company, and they're going to throw just, I want to say boxes, but boxes, crates, there we go, crates of this tea into the Boston Harbor, right? Just crates and crates of it. I can't remember the exact figure. It's like a lot of money that they're a product that we're just throwing away, just going for it, America. And obviously Britain is a bit angry over this. Some might say outraged. And so they're going to pass the 4 coercive acts. 1, the port of Boston will be closed. Now that doesn't sound like a huge deal, but that limits their trade, right? That limits their ability to trade outside of Boston, to import anything, to trade with anybody, which is not good. Trying to control the movement of people. Scary, right? 2, the Government Act will annul Massachusetts Colony Charter and prohibit town meetings. So this is the whole government of Boston is now pretty much under the rule of the king. 3, the Quartering Act is going to mandate new barracks for British troops. So more troops are coming over and you got to take care of them. 4, the Justice Act will allow for the trials of capital crimes to be transferred to other colonies or Britain. This is focusing in on the Boston Massacre, that those troops who were a part of the Boston Massacre can now go back to Britain to be tried for their crimes rather than here in the colonies, because the idea is that they're probably going to have more loyalty and bias in Great Britain towards those troops versus here in the colonies where they would want to see them be punished. These measures are going to be called the intolerable acts by the Patriots. Remember, the power of words, people. Intolerable. Like, we can't stand this. And in 1774, Parliament will also pass the Quebec Act, which will allow Roman Catholics in Quebec into these territories. So the big part about this is that it's going to show the colonies just the lengths to which Britain is willing to go. And it makes other colonies quite nervous about what could happen to them, right? That if this happens to Boston, what could happen to us? We have one moment, Britain gets in a bad mood about something. The king gets upset over it. What could happen to us? This will then lead to the First Continental Congress. This will be a meeting in Philadelphia. It's going to be the 12 mainland colonies in Philadelphia in September 1704, and they're going to advocate boycott of New Englanders that will want political union and defensive military plans. Mid-Atlantic colonists are going to want political compromise. So I like to think of this as a moment kind of like where we're like trying to like go to like couples counseling, right? I'm trying to think of things out. Like, we're not ready to break up yet. We're definitely fighting. Things are not good. And if you had to place your bets on how long this relationship's going to last, not long. We're fighting a lot. But there's still a possibility. People are like, well, maybe, we really love Great Britain. We can make things work out. So our Mid-Atlantic is like compromise. Maybe it might be okay. These men of loyal principles are going to propose a new system in which each colony would have an assembly plus representation in a continent-wide political body. And the king would appoint a president general to preside over the legislative council by the colonial assemblies. This plan is going to fail by a single vote. The majority is going to want a declaration of rights and grievances called for an end to the coercive acts and give British only limited control of trade. They're going to threaten to cut off trade with Britain, Ireland, and the British West Indies if the coercive acts are not repealed by September 1705. Instead, Lord North will impose a naval blockade on American trade with foreign nations in order general gauge to end resistance in Massachusetts. So you're just seeing just escalation, right? Like, the colonists take a step and the British take a step. The colonists take a step, the British take a step. That we're just up in the ante as we go. So Again, remember, not everyone's on the same page. I know it's super easy in history because for like a bajillion years since it happened to think that like, oh yeah, everyone agreed because obviously we become the United States. But it's not that way, right? There are differing opinions on everything. Just like in 2020, people have varying viewpoints and stuff. They did all the way back in the 1770s, right? And so they're going to be supporters of the king. They're going to fear anarchy. It's in people who are wealthy, people who are poor, that they have their own reasons for why they support the king. Tenant farmers are going to dislike landlords and are going to support the king. Some are going to fear slave insurrection if they support slave insurrection if they go against the British because they're fearing the idea of going against a power that it will embolden enslaved people to also rebel. Historians estimate that some 15 to 20% of the white population at the start of the American Revolution will remain loyal to the crown. Loyalists will be driven out of their homes and forced into silence as we enter into the American Revolution. There are going to be people who are going to propose neutrality, right? Our pacifist Quakers, they're not about war, not now, not never, right? That's not part of their religion. Germans will also want to remain neutral because of their religious convictions. Some are going to remain neutral because they hope to preserve their family's property and independence, right? Like, let's just keep quiet. Let's just keep doing what we're doing in order to make sure my stuff is okay. That they don't want to kind of overturn the system that they're living within. But then we're going to have an intense escalation extremely quickly. So in October 1772, the British revenue crisis is going to lead them to raise Fort Pitt. This will leave colonial settlers exposed and vulnerable to the Ohio Native Americans. Pennsylvania and Virginia are both going to claim the region. Virginia's royal governor, the Earl of Dunmore, will organize a local militia to rebuild at the site of Fort Pitt. Then in the summer of 1774, Dunmore, that Earl, the royal governor of Virginia, is going to defy both his royal instructions and the House of Burgesses, so the government of the colony of Virginia, and he's going to call out Virginia's militia and lead a force of 2,400 men against the Ohio Shawnees, the Native American tribe there, and they're going to have a battle they will have the Battle of Point Pleasant, where they're going to defeat the Shawnees. Dunmore's forces then are going to claim the area of Kentucky as their own. You're going to see that General Gage is going to order British troops in Boston to seize Patriot armories in Charleston and Cambridge. An army of 20,000 militiamen are going to mobilize to safeguard other military locations. Our militiamen are going to be our Minutemen, our commoner army of the colonies. The Concord town meeting is going to raise a defensive force. They're going to call them the Minutemen. And British are going to claim that Massachusetts was an open rebellion against them. And General Gage is going to march against the rude rebel. This will then lead to Lexington and Concord, the first shots of the American Revolution. On the night of April 18, 1775, General Gage is going to dispatch 700 soldiers to capture colonial leaders and supplies at Concord. Paul Revere is going to warn patriots of their impending arrival. You know, the British are coming, the British are coming. Although he does this via lanterns. He's not like shouting up on through towns and stuff, because that would be wild. Militiamen are going to confront them at Lexington and Concord. So they get the British are coming, you get the militiamen together, they confront them, and a handful of people are going to die. Militia from neighboring towns will repeatedly ambush retreating British soldiers, and by the end, 73 British soldiers are dead, 174 wounded, 26 missing, and the British had killed 49 colonial militiamen and wounded 39. So in the very first battle, the colonies took the dub, right? We did a great job. This is also going to be in conjunction with Thomas Paine's Common Sense. So America is still divided, right? We aren't completely against the king yet, but there's a lot of things happening that we're like, ugh, yeah, we don't really want to be part of Great Britain anymore. Like, this is not a good relationship all around. In January 1776, what an important year, Thomas Paine is going to publish a pamphlet called Common Sense. And in there, he is going to call for independence and a republican form of government. Paine is going to assault the traditional monarchy in stirring language, right? He's going to make people feel a lot of things. They're like, yeah, down with the man. And they're going to want to call for independence. This pamphlet is going to help tip the balance and convince the majority to get behind the independence movement, which then is going to lead us into the Second Continental Congress. So moderates are going to hope for peace and reconciliation with the king. They're going to ask for a repeal of oppressive measures. So pretty much we send him a letter and we're like, please be better. The radical patriots, Sam Adams, Patrick Henry, are going to call for taking up arms. They want to fight the king. Radicals are going to gain support for the invasion of Canada. Yes, there are many times in early American history where we try to invade Canada. Merchants are going to cut off exports to Britain and her West Indies colonies. There's going to be local skirmishes between the Loyalists and Patriots that's going to happen in our southern colonies. In November 1775, Lord Dunmore in Virginia is going to promise freedom to slaves and indentured servants who joined the British in the war. Fear is going to grow that the lower classes are going to rebel against the Patriots. The Patriots are going to plan a meeting in 1776, the Continental Congress, in order to resolve what's going on and to decide to support independence or not. So you're going to see that in the wake of Dunmore's war, settlers are going to begin to occupy newly won lands in Kentucky. This is where it becomes relevant, where I just talked about Kentucky. And they're going to petition Virginia's rebel government, and they're going to ask to create a new colony that's going to include the Kentucky settlements. In 1776, Virginia is going to agree and send arms and ammunition to Kentucky so the settlers could fight against the British. So you're seeing that we are really going hard on this. Okay. So the Second Continental Congress had agreed, like, hey, we'll come back, we'll decide what we're going to think. In the meantime, we're going to have Thomas Jefferson draft a declaration. We're going to see what we think about it. So Thomas Jefferson crafts this beautiful declaration, puts it all together, and you're going to see the Patriot Conventions are calling for independence. And on July 4th, 1776, the Declaration will be approved, authored by Thomas Jefferson and others, but mostly T.J. And then they're going to vilify the king. There's just that whole section where they're like, the king did this, the king did that, the king did this, the king did that, like poo-poo on you, right? And they're going to use Enlightenment thinking to proclaim the rights of men. They will link individual liberty, popular sovereignty, and republican government. So there we go. I can't play this on my setup that I have here, but there is a scene in, there's a John Adams HBO documentary that docu-series that I feel like just encapsulates this whole moment, right? That, like, of course we know, hey, maybe I will be able to play it. We know that the colonies make it out and become the United States of America. So we're like, yeah, down with Britain, woo woo, but they don't know that in 1776, right? They just know that Britain is the strongest world power with the strongest army and navy at this point in history. And the colonies do not have those things. That Britain is super wealthy, that they can pay for a war. We are not, as the colonies. And that there's this whole idea, what's going to happen to you when you sign the Declaration of Independence? You sign your name, and let's say things don't work out. Let's say you get captured by the king. Guess what? You're going to be hung until you're like just barely alive. And then they're going to take you down. They're going to quarter your body, meaning they're going to rip it apart into 4 quarters. Delicious, right? And then they take your body and they're going to dump it out in different parts of the sea, so no one knows where you reside in your eternal resting place. So things are not so good, because all of these men who signed the Declaration of Independence will be seen as traitors. Okay, so we will talk more about this in class and what we have going on and where you think that turning point is. But I hope you enjoyed this beautiful lecture. Let me know if you have any questions. Go find your primary sources, and I'll see you in class on